Hello, Dog Nation. Happy Monday to all of you. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella, window and door of Georgia. We have a busy show on tap for you, so whichever video platform you're joining us on, we're glad that you're here. Kirby Smart setting the stage for G-Day on Saturday with a press conference on Saturday. We will highlight some of the best clips from that for you here today. Georgia also got a big commit over the weekend from a big name in the class of 2025. We will focus in on that. John Stinchcomb stops by, the former UGA All-American, and he'll help us preview what's going to go down on Saturday there as well. So we've got so much going on. So happy to have you with us here, all for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella, window and door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella, window and door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So if you follow politics and you have a habit of watching cable news, there's one thing you sort of see from time to time, which is it sort of seems like they have a way of hyping up every election. This is the biggest election of our lifetime. You've ever seen that before? And it's sort of like professional wrestling, how every WrestleMania is bigger than any other one's ever been before. And it just sort of seems like you kind of fall into the habit of hyping everything as bigger than anything's ever been before. Well, I say all that to say this. I sort of feel like this time of year we have a habit around here and probably anywhere where Georgia fans get together of kind of doing that for G-Day, the annual spring scrimmage, which will take place for Georgia this upcoming Saturday. We have a way of viewing this, and for me it feels authentically true, although maybe it doesn't always come across that way. But it just sort of feels like every G-Day, oh my gosh, this is the biggest, the most interesting G-Day we've ever had. Because I do sort of feel like that's what this upcoming Saturday's G-Day feels like, but I also am self-aware enough to know that we've probably said this a lot before over the course of the years we've been doing this. But in particular, this year's G-Day I think is fascinating. This is a Georgia team that has won 2 straight national championships, and obviously shoots for a third, go for 3 and 23 here for this upcoming season. But there's big changeover in terms of how Georgia's going to be able to get that done. And maybe no area in which the change is more significant than at quarterback, where Stetson Bennett's not here anymore. The guy that's helped lead them to these last 2 national championships, he's no longer part of the program, and we're left to find out, okay, is his next in line here to fill his shoes? Is that going to be Carson Beck, last year's backup? Is that going to be Brock Vandagriff, the former 5-star? That, to me, is really fascinating. It's not the only thing fascinating about G-Day, and over the course of the next few days here on the show, I think we'll do our part to kind of preview a lot of this, but it is certainly maybe the most interesting aspect of what's going to happen for the Dogs, the red team against the black team, coming up on Saturday. And with that in mind, Kirby Smart, to conclude another week of spring practice on Saturday, spoke about what he'd seen from Georgia during these practices here thus far, and I think a lot of what Smart said sets the stage for a very entertaining day on Saturday. So what we're going to do here for a couple of minutes is sort of use Smart's words as a little bit of a template for how we can all view G-Day on Saturday. And at least based on kind of a short throwaway comment that Kirby offered this past weekend, there's one thing we can go into Saturday expecting, at least based on how Georgia's been managing its practices thus far during the spring. This is short, but I want to let you hear it because I think it sets the stage for what we can maybe kind of expect to see from the Dogs inside Sanford Stadium on Saturday. This is Kirby reflecting on his scrimmage work from this past week. Kirby from Saturday.
Probably didn't attempt to run the ball, but we didn't run the ball as well as we did first scrimmage. Why? Maybe a little intentional because we want to evaluate the quarterbacks and we want to throw the ball more with them.
So obviously during the season when Georgia's out there beating up opponents, Georgia fans like the idea of being RBU and putting a great crop of running backs out there in the field and kind of dominating physically their opponents, especially with a lead in the second half. Georgia fans like that. There's a long history and heritage of great running back play at Georgia, and during the season, that's what Georgia fans want. But if we're to be honest here for a moment, I'm not really quite so sure that's what the majority of Georgia fans want on G-Day. On G-Day, especially in a year like this, in which you've got a quarterback competition taking place, I think Georgia fans want to see Georgia throw the ball on G-Day, maybe even more than it typically would during a regular game. And if Georgia operates on G-Day the same way that it has in some of its scrimmage work this spring, Well, maybe that's what you're going to see, because you just heard Kirby Smart say right there of, hey, I don't know if it was a great day for our running backs, and I don't know if I was able to evaluate them during this closed-door scrimmage this past week all that well, because intentionally we were avoiding running plays because we want our quarterbacks to throw the football. We want to see what we have in those guys right now. That's what Kirby Smart said. Well, guess what? If that's what Kirby Smart is thinking, to me, I think that sets up for most Georgia fans as good news going into a spring scrimmage on Saturday, because you better believe, for those tuning in to watch it on television, for those showing up in Sanford Stadium, lucky enough to get tickets to be able to do that, I do think they want to see Georgia throw the ball a lot. I think they want to see what Brock Vandagriff brings to the table. I think they want to see what Carson Beck brings to the table, and Gunnar Stockton too as well. I think that Georgia fans want to see what these quarterbacks are all about as a way of determining, okay, is this quarterback competition really close? Does one of these guys, by appearances, look ahead of the other guy? Is there a pecking order that's starting to fall in place? Well, Kirby Smart kind of gives you a little bit of a hint based on the way he said he handled Georgia's most recent closed-door scrimmage. That's exactly how Georgia may operate in this particular situation on Saturday. And then going beyond that, Kirby also gives all of us a very clear checklist of what to look for. If you're wanting to see for yourself who the very best quarterback is, if you're wanting to see for yourself who might be ahead in terms of earning that starting quarterback opportunity, Kirby Smart laid it out in pretty clear terms about exactly what he wants to see from an operations standpoint, including highlighting one play in particular that we all ought to notice when we get together between the edges on Saturday afternoon. Here's Kirby Smart once again talking about kind of how his quarterbacks are operating from like a cerebral standpoint between the ears, and then he moves into specifically on the field in action what he wants to see. This is very candid stuff from Kirby. It was from Saturday. Take a listen to it.
Less boneheadedness today than previous. I don't think the second scrimmage was, there were moments where it's like, okay, at this point, concede the down, live for another down. If that happens to be third down, that's okay. You can punt, you can kick a field goal, you can go for it on fourth, but you can if you have boneheadedness. And they seem to grasp that better, but they all need to play. They all need to play football. Go out and play football, not have a drill, not routes on air, not 7-on-7. They need to play. And that's what we're trying to do in our practices, is make sure we get enough playing. Playing is third down. There's no greater pressure on a quarterback than third down. I mean, first and second down, play action, handoff, not a lot there. It's either there or it's not. Third down, that's where you make the separation, and we're trying to put those guys in that situation so we can improve them.
There's two things about that clip I absolutely love. First of all, there's this. Sometimes a coach like Kirby Smart, you'd almost expect to hear him downplay G-Day. Maybe someone like Kirby might say something to the effect of, we get X number of practices during the spring. In a lot of ways, this G-Day is only one of those practices for us, basically not trying to make too much of it. Who knows? Maybe Kirby Smart reserves the right. Maybe he'll say something like that on Saturday. But in this particular clip you just heard, it seems like Kirby's taking the opposite tack. Instead of saying, hey, let's don't make too much of G-Day, Kirby Smart seems to be enhancing the importance of G-Day, saying this is our chance to create some real football opportunities for you, because my understanding is they kind of really dealt with the weather a little bit. They tried to have a scrimmage on Thursday, I guess, because of the fact that they knew it was going to rain on Saturday. Yet lightning ended up taking them indoors, and I guess they didn't like the idea of having the full scrimmage type thing inside for various reasons. And so I don't quite know that Georgia got its full scrimmage in this past week the way that it wanted to. At least that's my understanding of the situation. So therefore, all the more important this upcoming Saturday for G-Day, because as Kirby Smart says, listen, there's only so much evaluating we can do in a drill. There's only so much evaluating we can do when we're trying to play pretend football during practice. There is a certain point in which you got to play real football. And G-Day is not quite real football, but the TV cameras are on. The band's going to be playing. The fans are in the stands. That's about as close of an approximation to real football as you can get without playing another opponent. And who knows, maybe one day we'll see Georgia do that for a spring game. But for now, this is what you got. And Kirby Smart, I think, with the words that he uses there, kind of enhances the importance of G-Day on Saturday, which if you're a fan, you've got a ticket in your hand, or you're looking forward to getting together with some friends and watching it on TV, that makes you more excited, right? I mean, that makes you more into this. That to me sets up for a pretty entertaining day when Kirby Smart himself is sort of amping up the importance of what happens when this team plays something that sort of looks like real football against itself. And then to take matters to another level, Kirby Smart also kind of zeroes in something here, kind of thin slices for you a little bit and says, hey, specifically, I want to see what these guys do on third down. That to me is going to be the line of demarcation. That's going to be the measuring stick for who's doing what. What are you doing on third down? Well, you better believe if that's what Kirby Smart says he's watching, I would advise Georgia fans to watch that there as well. I mean, clearly there's just something to be said for avoiding third down and operating the offense in such a way you don't get there or make it third and short so it's a little bit easier to handle. Of course, there's something to be said for that. But at some point in time in this game, there's going to be a 3rd and 7 or a 3rd and 8 or 3rd and 9. What kind of decisions get made then? What kind of plays get made then? Can somebody keep the drive alive, move the chains, and set yourself up for a scoring opportunity? If they do, between the two guys we expect or we believe are competing to be the starter, Brock Vanderriff and Carson Beck, that could go a long way towards actually determining who may be in the best overall position to eventually win this quarterback job. I think it's really cool that Kirby Smart kind of zeroes in on specifically what to watch for from the quarterbacks on this particular Saturday. I think it makes it more entertaining. But then to kind of circle back to something we were talking about before, Kirby Smart saying, hey, I'm not really quite so sure how much we've gotten a chance to evaluate the running backs as of late because we have been trying to throw the football more. And Georgia fans, I do believe, want to see that on G-Day. But in addition to that, I mean, there is also, I think, some excitement about some young Georgia running backs. We know the situation here. Kendall Milton, veteran who's been here for a while, he's a little bit banged up. Dejon Edwards, veteran running back who I think has a pretty high level of expectation around him for the upcoming season. He's a little bit banged up. So that kind of opens the door for a guy we talked about last week, the true freshman Roderick Robinson, and a guy who's been here now for a year, Branson Robinson. And Branson in particular has got a large fan base that follows him. You understand why that is. He was a guy who came out of the state of Mississippi as a high school running back, a lot of accolades around him, and now getting a chance to see him in an even bigger role in this particular G-Day on Saturday in what could be an even bigger year for him here at Georgia. And it sounds like one of the guys that Georgia fans are looking forward to watching on Saturday, Robinson, it sounds like he's had for himself a pretty good spring, all the more reason to sort of see what he brings to the table on G-Day. In fact, this is the update that Kirby gave us on Branson Robinson from Saturday there as well.
Well, you see more things he needs to improve on because you get to see more things, period. But you also see flashes of explosiveness, burst of improvement. He's had a couple runs where he's really shown flexibility to drop his pads, take on contact, keep going. Knock on wood, his ball security's been good. His pass pro could use some improvement, but he's worked hard on that. He had a couple really good pickups today. So I think these opportunities for growth for him have been really good. He got lots of opportunities last year to run the ball where maybe you guys didn't see it, but we saw it because he did it in practice. But he didn't get as much pass protection and routes out of the backfield as he's getting now. So it's given him a chance to really put himself in position to have a great fall.
Once again, very candid from Kirby. I would say mostly complimentary for a guy that already is a big fan favorite. Maybe a chance to showcase some of that on G-Day there as well as Georgia kind of works through its offensive identity for the upcoming season. Which of the Georgia running back can really be depended on to kind of give this team the ground attack that it needs? How do you pair that with a passing attack that we hope and expect to be as potent as it was the last couple of years with Todd Monken at the helm, now transitioning to the Mike Bobo era as offensive coordinator now in his second stint here at UGA. And to kind of finish things up with Kirby, he also talked about that there too. That right now the whole, offensive installation is still a little bit of a work in progress. And the main thing to find out on Saturday is which pieces can you put into which places to kind of create the best version of Georgia offensively. Kirby knowing it's only spring, but the work you do now sets the stage for what you'll eventually do here this fall. Here is Kirby Smart on that topic about exactly what he's looking for as far as an offensive identity for this Georgia team here this season. Kirby once again.
Yeah, offensive personality is always what you have, right? Whatever you have, you use what you have. And right now, it's not like we're not like saying, "Ooh, let's cater our offense to Brock, Ladd, Kendall Milton, who's not out there." We're not doing that. We're evaluating players, not plays. We're trying to figure out what players can help us. Then we'll worry about the plays. So I don't put a lot of pressure on offensive identity in the spring. Like, we got to figure out who the quarterback is. We got to figure out who the guys to get the ball are, who are the guys that without the ball in their hands are valuable. Those are harder to find than guys. I mean, we got about 10 guys out there. We can put the ball in their hand, they're going to make plays, but who's blocking for them? I'm a lot more interested in who that is and figuring out who that is. So that's kind of where we are on that.
So I don't know about you, but all the stuff that Kirby Smart is saying makes this a football game for me on Saturday that I really want to watch. Who's the quarterback going to be between Brock Vandagriff and Carson Beck? Sounds like we'll see a lot from both these guys as well as Gunnar Stockton this upcoming Saturday. And then when we're not seeing them throw the football, it's young running backs like Branson Robinson and Roderick Robinson on display, getting a chance to learn a little bit more about what they bring to the table. And then the crop of playmakers around that, newcomers at wide receiver, the next phase of a tight end group at Georgia that seemed to be pretty impressive too. More on that as the week goes along. All of this for Georgia offense that really has high expectations for it. This has been one of the best units in the country the last couple of years to go along with great defensive play. There's really no reason, even with change at quarterback and change with the offensive coordinator and key losses off the offensive line, there's no reason why this group can't be just as successful again in 2023. But the work for doing that is going on this spring. And the final exam of this spring session takes place on Saturday. And the good news, all of us get a chance to see that with our own eyes. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We're glad to have you with us no matter how you may get to us today. Live on video, 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, lots of different ways to watch us on video. We appreciate you finding us however you might get a chance to. Also on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Great to have you there as a part of that for those who tune in on the radio in the Classic City, and of course as a podcast. Wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, the world-famous DawgNation.com. Lots of ways to connect with us podcast-wise. We just try to make the show as available as we can, as many ways we can. We just appreciate all of you who find some way that you enjoy to enjoy this show. Truly grateful for all of that. And really thankful for our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia there as well, equipping your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. And that does a couple of things for you. Makes your house look better on the outside, which makes you a better neighbor, of course, taking care of that curb appeal. But also better curb appeal could also benefit you in terms of better resale value when you're ready to do that. But not only that, those Pella windows and doors do a great job of keeping the stuff that's supposed to stay on the outside. That means when it's windy and rainy like it was on Saturday, you don't feel that draft inside your house. You don't have that sort of damp feeling inside there. No, because the properly fitted and sealed quality product that Pella's known for, those windows and doors, they keep all that junk on the outside where it's supposed to be, keeping you nice and comfortable on the inside there as well. So it may be time, if you want to make the best possible decisions you can to take the best possible care of your home, it may be time to have a conversation with one of those Pella experts right now. Now, the good news is this is not a pressure type thing. This is just an informational meeting. You can find out about the full line of Pella products. You can find out what makes them the best, survey after survey here in our market area. Homeowners identifying Pella windows and doors as the true recognized best in this particular space. You can find out why. You can also learn about installation options, financing options if that's something you're interested in. You can learn about all of that. Stop by and see them right there in their Experience Center in Duluth. You can get more on that. Or you can begin your experience online by going to pellaofga.com/DawgNation. That's pellaofga.com/DawgNation. Also give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. By the way, right now, also take advantage of great savings. Between now and May 22nd, you can get 10% off your entire project or 0% APR for 24 months. All of that from Pella Window and Door of Georgia, truly viewed to be the best. We're going to talk to John Stinchcomb here coming up in just a moment. A lot to get into with John. We'll kind of keep our G-Day preview going with him here in just a moment. Prior to that, I want to go around the DawgHouse. I want to talk some UGA recruiting here for a moment because Dogs got some good news yesterday. As Elias Williams, who's a five-star prospect for the class of 2025, and I guess the recruiting service sort of have him listed as an edge rusher, but Georgia recruiting him as a tight end. Williams making his pledge to the Dogs yesterday. I'll show you a nice social media edit here of Williams out there with the Dogs. Take a look at him looking good in this Georgia uniform. Nice social media edit. You see UGA there. You see the G glowing behind him. So good to bring in Elias Williams into the class here for Georgia for that class of 2025. And DawgNation had a chance to catch up with Williams about what it was that made him want to choose Georgia, why it was that he did that. I'll read this clip, this quote here from Elias Williams about why it was that he chose Georgia. Maybe no surprise, he's the top Todd Hartley's a big factor in all of this. Williams saying that the talks I've had with Kirby Smart and Todd Hartley, he says, I grew up on the Georgia Bulldogs and have an opportunity to stay at home and be a part of the dynasty. Boy, that word sounds good, doesn't it? Calling Georgia a dynasty after 2 straight national championships, I think you'd have to say that's kind of what Georgia is, and looking to build on that even more. And you love the idea that Williams is calling Georgia a dynasty. He says it's a tough decision to deny, and I felt like it was a perfect time. So I think all that's great. He comes out of a Charlton County program, which is one of the great kind of lower classification programs in the state of Georgia, traditionally, typically very talent rich. And obviously Williams is an example of that. And I think he really gave you great reasoning for why it was he chose UGA. The tradition of success that Kirby Smart's helped build there, and the impact of Todd Hartley. And you know, this is one of those things that kind of causes me to kind of go back on something we heard Kirby Smart say there a moment ago of, hey, you know, we're trying to figure out what our offensive personality is. And obviously, to a place like Georgia, there is some responsibility to get as many different guys involved in the story as you can. That keeps players happier. It keeps them in the program longer. Kirby said to us last week, I believe, that their ultimate goal is to keep 70% of the players they sign out of high school with the program, prevent them from transferring. I think that Georgia's doing a pretty good job with that. So making everyone sort of feel like they have some buy-in and an opportunity to succeed, that's a part of the story at Georgia. But in addition to that, there are going to be some position groups that just sort of step to the forefront more so than others. I don't think there's any denying that tight end at Georgia has been one of those spots. And when you talk about the overall playing personality of the Georgia offense, utilizing tight ends in the most creative ways possible and utilizing the unique athletic skill sets these players bring to the table, in a lot of ways, that really is the Georgia identity. Now, that's not a button you always have to push. You know, we would see games last year in which Brock Bowers, who I believe is truly one of the very best players in the country, maybe he didn't always get a lot of touches, but the final game of the season against TCU, a national championship where there was really nothing to save. You might as well just sort of throw everything you got out there. When that game, Bowers had darn near 200 yards receiving and almost got 1,000 yards for the season. So Georgia right now is showing that it can use tight ends better than anyone in the country, and that's one of the reasons why you've got guys like Lawson Lucky, we'll talk more about later on this week, impressive recruit from the class of 2023. He's already paying big dividends at Georgia. A guy like Oscar Delp waiting in the wings from the class of 2022. He's going to get his chance to do the same kind of stuff. Look at Landon Thomas, class of 2024, and now Williams for the class of 2025. This is an identity that has been cemented into place at Georgia because of the work of a guy like Todd Hartley. And the good news is Kirby Smart knows this full well too. Go back to 2021 here for a moment. Kirby Smart talking about just how well Georgia has incorporated the tight ends into what it wants to do offensively. If this was true when Kirby Smart said this almost 2 years ago, it appears even more true now. This is Kirby on the success of tight ends, with Georgia landing another big commit from one here this weekend.
Coach Hartley's done a great job. First, it starts with recruiting, go get good players, and then get them to buy into the team and buy into blocking and being selfless, and then buy into making plays when you get an opportunity. I think, again, the whole offensive staff puts the plan together that off of our play action, our tight ends are weapons. They're size guys. They make plays down the field, and we've got a good, talented tight end room. And as long as they buy in to the team first concept, then we got a chance to be successful.
Sometimes the simplest point's the most accurate, and simply put, Todd Hartley is one of the very best assistant coaches in all of college football. And no matter what Georgia's paying him, it almost certainly comes at a bargain, because I don't know that anyone has recruited a position better than Hartley does, especially understanding the fact that unlike some position groups where you have multiple targets every single year, for the most part, Georgia's only targeting one or maybe two tight ends in any given year. The opportunity for landing big names is just smaller, and yet Hartley almost seems to always land exactly the player that he's looking for, including a situation like this, now 1 and 2 years ahead in terms of big commits for both the class of 2024 and now 2025. And Hartley's success as a recruiter has allowed Georgia to incorporate tight ends into its overall offensive personality. The names may change. There's no Darnell Washington this year, but that just means more chance for Oscar Delp, more chance for Lawson Lucky to go along with Brock Bowers, who I do truly believe in his third season is set to be one of the very best players in the entire country. So why wouldn't you keep the pipeline of recruiting going? And that's exactly what Hartley seems to be doing for Georgia right now. And the Dogs on the field undoubtedly reaping the benefits there. Another big commitment there at that tight end position. And that is around the DawgHouse on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia today. So for more on that and for more on what's going to happen for Georgia on G-Day on Saturday, let's get a great preview of that with a guy we love talking to each and every Monday. It's the former UGA All-American. It's John Stinchcomb here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So I do want to talk about G-Day a lot, but John, let me bring you in on what we were just discussing. You know, Elias Williams is a tight end for the class of 2025. That's still a ways away in terms of him being, you know, here in Athens, but Georgia's also already got a big tight end committed for the class of 2024 in Landon Thomas out of Colquitt County. And, you know, that goes along with, Lawson Lucky, who's seemingly having a very good spring for Georgia right now. Oscar Delp, year older than that, who seems to be in line for a lot more playing time this year, too. You know, John, as an offensive tackle, you line up next to those tight ends from time to time. How valuable do you believe it is that Georgia, through Todd Hartley's recruiting and the way in which the offensive system has utilized these guys, how valuable do you think it is that Georgia has become such a destination for the tight end position?
It's amazing how the conversation has changed. I know 5 years ago when we were talking about tight ends, it was, you know, are we able to recruit the national level 5-star tight ends because of the way we've utilized them? And what's been proven over time is Georgia's exceptional at utilizing tight ends. I think you look at when we first had those conversations with Darnell Washington and obviously Brock Bowers on the table, it was, Can we draw that type of talent, and then can we utilize it once it gets here? And I think everyone has answered those questions, and it becomes that great recruiting tool for your ability to draw those players and say, hey, not only will you have great opportunities once you get here, but we're going to develop you and further your skills, which I think is what Georgia's done an exceptional job of. When we were talking about Stetson Bennett last week, it was, you know, with his success and what he's been able to do, can we draw more attention for, you know, those 5-star quarterbacks? And I think what Georgia's been able to do at the tight end position kind of speaks for itself, and Todd Hartley definitely deserves a lion's share of the credit there.
I think if you gave me the choice of having the best wide receiver in the country, the best tight end in the country, I know most of the average fans probably gravitate towards the receivers. It seems like, you know, they get a lot of the attention, but I'm not quite so sure it's not better to have the best tight end in the country because of the versatility it provides your offense. You can use them as a weapon in the running game. That's what Georgia did with Darnell Washington, but that guy can also be a weapon in the passing game. That's what Brock Bowers has been. And I also believe that Bowers is a better blocker than he's given credit for. In terms of the overall versatility of what it brings to the table, I think it's actually probably better to have the very best tight end. Georgia may prove that this year with Brock Bowers once again. And you better believe a team that doesn't use tight ends, they're just not winning the national championship. These teams that only go 4 wide receiver that don't have the tight end, to me, they begin the year outside of the national championship conversation. That's just too finesse-oriented for my taste. So I think that Georgia has kind of found a niche here with the tight end position at a time in which I think the overall position is actually really important at both the college and the professional level.
And it's because it demands so much from a defense. It's a personnel and scheme issue when an offense has a threat at the tight end position because of the flexibility, because of the versatility of, is this run or pass? Is he in line? Is he a slot wide receiver? Where's he going to line up? The pressure that it puts on a defense is unique, different from a wide receiver where, you know, we can rotate some coverage and we can kind of highlight what he does best and try to eliminate those things. With a tight end, because of that versatility and when they excel at both run blocking and in the pass game, it causes a real challenge for a defensive coordinator. Who are you going to deploy? If he's a wide receiver threat, you would think they'd want to bring an extra defensive back on the field and match up with the speed. But if they're also adept at blocking in the run game, then you've just created a mismatch for yourself to hold up at the point of attack. So it's a real challenge for coordinators, and I think because of the progression of the game and the more flexibility that offensive coordinators have found with the position, the ability to use the tight end as a slot wide receiver, and sometimes we see them line up at the outside position. It creates those matchups that they're looking for to not only have opportunities for that tight end to excel, but also you can kind of manipulate what the defense is doing to create holes for other players.
Let me ask you this, and I was not going to ask you this, but now I guess I kind of want to. So Williams is from Charlton County, and he talked about in the story from DawgNation over the weekend about this was kind of an emotional decision for him because he says he grew up cheering for the Georgia Bulldogs, and there was a little bit of an emotional tie for him to UGA. And it just sort of seems like, John, for whatever reason, that south of Atlanta, we hear guys say this kind of thing a lot, whether it be Charlton County or Colquitt County or, all across, the sort of state, sort of south of, Macon, south of Atlanta. You just sort of hear that kind of stuff a lot. And it seems like sometimes we don't hear the same emotional connection from, your neck of the woods. You grew up in Gwinnett County. A lot of those metro Atlanta guys sometimes don't seem to have the same emotional pull for Georgia that the guys south of the Atlanta area sometimes seem to have. I mean, I guess you can say, well, Atlanta's a bit more of a transient city. People who live in the Atlanta area didn't grow up in the state of Georgia necessarily. But what else do you attribute that to? The fact that it seems like there's a little bit more of a hometown pull sometimes for Georgians farther away from Athens than there is for the guys who live a little closer to campus.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, and I think a lot of it does have to do with the transient nature of Atlanta and metro Atlanta families. I think it's also noteworthy that Charlton County provided one of the best family lineages that Georgia's ever been able to witness in the Baileys.
You're right.
Champ, Boss,
You're right.
Ronald. I mean, they all come from Charlton County. So there's some good water down there. But when you're looking at the loyalty to Georgia, I think when you get closer to Atlanta and metro Atlanta, I think the exposure to other programs, but there probably isn't those deep roots and loyalty to the red and black like you find in smaller towns across the state. I'd say the proximity to major other universities matters. I think West Georgia, you're always battling against Auburn and Alabama, and North Georgia you have Tennessee, and once you get further south, it's Florida State. But I think the access probably to, one, having the transient nature of Atlanta, but two, just the access to hop on an airplane and go watch other teams is a lot easier there too. So I don't know all the whys, but those are probably some circumstantial evidence as to why there's probably a greater loyalty to Georgia in more rural Georgia than once you get closer to the big city.
I want to shift our attention to G-Day, and I joked before you joined us that it seems like every year I'm saying something to the effect of, this is the most interesting G-Day we've ever had. Probably have a tendency to overhype things. I'm probably guilty of that from time to time, kind of a carnival barker by nature. But, John, this really may be the most interesting G-Day we've ever had because I think the quarterback competition is fascinating. And I think that Georgia, at least based on what Kirby Smart has said, is going to put these guys in a position on Saturday to show what they're all about. And yet, in addition to that, you got young running backs we want to see. You've got a crop of new playmakers, including a couple transfer wide receivers. People want to see them there as well. I know we say this every year, but at least on the offensive side of the ball, I think it's fascinating to see what Georgia looks like, how efficiently it can play offensively, and really who comes to the forefront, especially at the quarterback position. How interested are you in what you see from these guys here this upcoming weekend?
Well, I think it's it's exciting because you're coming off two national championships, and Georgia proved, if nothing else, last year that replacing talent is something they're going to have to do on an annual basis. And this time we're a month away from saying unbelievable haul of NFL prospects that are left in the draft, and how are we going to find ways, and we're going to be relying on such young players. And the same holds true now, a year removed, because of the number of players that you lose, and specifically at the quarterback spot. I mean, it seems like that was a conversation that we had a couple years ago, but this past year was already answered. We felt pretty confident that Stetson would be the guy and continue to develop, and boy, did he ever. And this time of year, when you've got 2 trophies in the hall, and you're replacing a quarterback, and the expectations are still through the roof, and you've been able to recruit at such a high level, and the team is still so young, that there's a lot of excitement to see what do we have? Where are these guys at in their development, and still know that there's 3 or 4 months before season comes, and they're only going to get better. So I think there's reason for the excitement, and understandably, this G-Day is going to be important. It's a good window into where we're at as a program, and how do you continue to reach and exceed the exceptionally high expectations of national championships on an annual basis, which Georgia says is a realistic bar to hold.
One of the things that Kirby's also talked about a lot this spring is, kind of the idea of how quarterbacks operate, their precision, not just their own physical traits of throwing the football, but kind of managing the offense in such a way that you're able to just go out there and operate and play football. Like, to me, that's what G-Day oftentimes kind of becomes. It's the old cliche of, the defense is ahead of the offense. A lot of times it sort of seems like that's true for Georgia and a lot of other programs there as well, that the offense is just not quite capable of putting on a show during its spring game. I mean this across college football, where you just can't go out there and connect the way that you'd like to in kind of a midseason form in the fall. And to me, that's what Saturday's sort of about. Hey, Carson Beck's been here for 4 years, waiting his turn. Can he go out there and can he operate on Saturday? Can he put 10 other guys around him, and can they click offensively and move the football? The same thing for Brock Vandegrift there as well. Can they go out there and when he's on the field, can the offense move? Is it going to be fun to watch? I'm always sort of biased in favor of the offense during spring because I expect the defense to be good, and they're kind of hamstrung by the rule situation anyway during a G-Day. To me, this is a showcase for the offense. Are you capable of moving the football down the field? And if you are, that, to me, says something pretty good.
Yeah, let me counter that a little bit, because not always in spring games are you going to scheme and spice up the offense. You're going to go to some of your more bread and butter. Can our guys execute our mainstays, our staples of the offense? And then we'll throw in some more wrinkles and plan for a defense as we move into the season, all those things. But I do think the defense has the advantage. I think you have to coordinate all 11 guys offensively and get them on the same page, more so than defense. You have a defensive breakdown that's away from the play, and it doesn't matter. If you have a breakdown offensively, then it kind of sabotages the whole play. And I think that's probably one of the harder things, is to get everyone orchestrated and reading off the same sheet of music. And what you see in spring game is that development. And as you go through, I think it starts off that defense has that early advantage of, see ball, hit ball kind of thing. And the offense is trying to get more up to speed. But yet when you get to G-Day, it's like, all right, we've had 3 or 4 weeks of practice now, and we need to be able to put it all together. But it certainly isn't a spicy showing. I mean, there's not a lot of game plan going on. There's usually a trick play or two that's probably more for kicks and to keep things light than something that they've seen a weakness in the defense and they're trying to exploit.
Let me squeeze in one more thing before I let you go. I wish I had more time to talk about this on the show today. We'll have to do more of this later on in the week. But I thought that Kirby had some very candid and interesting things to say about Tyke Smith, the defensive back, when he spoke to the reporters on Saturday. And Tyke, to me, is an interesting figure. You talk to people who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. Sounds like Georgia wasn't necessarily thrilled with Tyke when he first arrived, based on what kind of the rumor mill is out there. Maybe questioning some of the speed, some things like that. He also dealt with some injury here at UGA, and yet through it all, it seems like Tyke has been pretty patient, and it seems like maybe that patience is about to pay off, because Kirby was actually really complimentary of him on this particular Saturday, talking about him kind of fighting for a role here on this team, and it sounds like he's in the midst of maybe getting some real significant playing time here this season. John is a guy who was a player and maybe you saw this happen for some of your teammates, sometimes when you're willing to be patient, good things eventually happen for you. And it seems like in the case of Tyke Smith, maybe that's the case. He's getting more acclimated with the SEC. He's sort of shaken off some early hype to now become a little bit more of a real and grounded football story. And it seems like it may be a story that ends up having a happy ending. I mean, what do you sort of see as a player when you see a guy like Tyke or any player like this who kind of goes through kind of a long arc to eventually earn some playing time and have that potentially pay off the way it sounds like it might for him in 2023?
Yeah, I think expectations is always a part of the evaluation, right? I mean, he comes in as all-conference player, and expectations were really high for him, and he's almost become a forgotten name on that roster because of the other guys that have stepped up and stepped into some of the roles. So as a fan, you're going, he didn't pan out, he wasn't a guy and that we thought we were going to get, and all those things. But I think it does say something when a player joins a program and sticks around, and he was the guy when he first got here. When he transferred in, he's leaving that kind of role and status and has humbled, I'm sure, himself and been humbled through this process of not being that go-to player and not having those opportunities for him to, one, still be a part of this program, two, be a name that draws recognition from the head coach is noteworthy. I think it shows the work that he's put in behind the scenes and is earning the right to be a part of the conversation again is something to be lauded and appreciated as fans. That's not always easy. We're talking about young men that are you spend so much time working on the game, and there's few opportunities to actually get out there and show and earn the opportunity to get some of the praise and benefit of all the work that you put in. And for a guy that has been a part of the program now for a few years, I think it's a good situation for Georgia. It's a good situation for him that he's positioned himself to be relevant as season rolls around.
John, it's always great to have this conversation with you. You're always some insightful when it comes to everything happening with Georgia football. I hope you enjoy a chance to see GD on Saturday. Certainly we'll look forward to talking to you about that next Monday. And enjoy your week there as well. Thanks for being with us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
Always enjoy it, BA. Go Dogs.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I'm glad John said what he said there about Tyke Smith. It's one of those things I do want to talk more about. Coming off a weekend, sometimes you don't have time to get everything into a show you want to. And some of what Kirby said on Saturday about Tyke Smith was about as interesting as anything from the weekend. So we'll do more of that in sort of larger space later on in the week when we have more time for that. But really strong words from John Stinchcomb about the idea of being patient, both the player being patient for growing into a role, the fan base being patient, allowing that to happen. And it seems like situations like this sometimes produce happy endings. Maybe in the case of Tyke Smith, that's going to be the case there as well. Speaking of happy endings, we're looking forward ourselves to a happy story here as we go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. By now, a lot of you know we have our DawgNation cruise here coming up really soon, but it's actually a different cruise I want to talk about for a moment. Yesterday was Easter, got together with my family, my brother and his kids coming over with me and my family, and we went to my mom's house and all having that kind of Easter meal and get together there. One of the hot topics as we were getting together is the fact we have a family cruise coming up in June, a chance to do that weekend getaway, 3-night cruise on board Independence of the Seas. Same cruise we're taking, by the way. I should say the same ship we're taking for the DawgNation cruise. And it's just one of those things. It's just kind of fun to have the whole family talking about that, looking forward to it, and getting it planned, and who's going to be doing what, and grandkids trying to figure out where they're going to be sleeping on the ship and things like that, which of the staterooms they're going to be in. It's just a fun thing. It's a fun conversation. And you owe it to yourself, I think, to create your own kind of fun opportunity and memory with your own family there as well, because the conversation leading into a cruise for me is just as good as the experience that you have when you actually get a chance to be on board and then the memories you have afterwards. But it's the anticipation that I always enjoy so much. And one of the things I continue to hear, including I got a tweet about this over the weekend there as well, a lot of you have been very pleased with the level of service you've gotten from a travel agent, specially selected for us, by Royal Caribbean. Her name is Jessica Slater. She's going to be on the Dog Nation cruise with us coming up. She's probably on a cruise right now if I know Jessica. Either way, she's a great travel agent. She truly is very, very well versed in everything that goes on with Royal Caribbean, and she can help you plan the best Royal Caribbean cruise for you and those that you care about. So check out Jessica today. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. 770-718-9147. And when you talk to Jessica, make sure you ask her about Icon of the Seas. Tell her that BA's been saying this on DawgNation Daily, debuting January of 2024. It's the brand new, newest cruise ship from Royal Caribbean. Going to have the largest water park at sea. They've already introduced a lot of the bar and lounge concepts. This is going to be unlike anything that Royal Caribbean's ever done before. It's truly going to be an unbelievable experience, and I hope to get a chance to be on board myself here coming up in early 2024, and I know many of you will love making plans for that already for yourself. So check out Jessica. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can find out more about that. All right, now let's go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean today. There were a couple of SEC spring games this past weekend. Now, what I told John Stinchcomb earlier is sometimes what you see from some of these teams in the spring is the offense just isn't quite capable of putting on a show. No matter how much you and some of these teams love to kind of orchestrate competition, so it's sort of ones against twos or starter-level players playing against backups, that's all done in the hopes that the first-team offense can look good and give the fans a show. But sometimes even with a stacked deck, that's still just not capable of happening. That was kind of the case for the Auburn spring game on Saturday. And some of this may be due to weather. In fact, all of this may be due to weather. Obviously, Saturday was not a very pretty weather day. Very heavily marred the Auburn spring game experience. So please keep that with a grain of salt with what I'm about to tell you. But our friends at Saturday on South kind of chronicled some of the stats here. So for Auburn, they had no completed passes in the first quarter. There was one pass completed for positive yards in the first half. There were drop passes all over the place. 5 combined complete passes by the 3 quarterbacks that performed for Auburn this past Saturday. That is rough. That, folks, is rough. Now, as I said before, that's weather impacted. The weather on Saturday across the South was really, really bad. But this is an Auburn program where Hugh Freeze has already said, hey, if given the right scenario, I may go look for a quarterback in the transfer portal. And even if you explain it all the way via weather, not a big showing for Robbie Ashford, who frankly is not getting a chance to show his legs off in a spring game anyway. So that already kind of puts him at a little bit of a disadvantage because his athleticism is a big part of what makes him a good quarterback. You have Holden Gariner from he's from Georgia. He's one of the backup situations there at Auburn. That's a guy a lot of Auburn fans like to see more of. It doesn't sound like on Saturday you got a chance to evaluate him very much. So for Hugh Freeze, who always kind of makes offensive success a big part of his coaching, DNA, quarterback not exactly showcasing very much during the spring year. Now, keep in mind, this is a Hugh Freeze who once took an Auburn cast-off at quarterback Malik Willis and turned him into an NFL prospect there at Liberty. So if anybody can get something out of quarterback, it would seem to be Hugh Freeze. But the spring game on this particular Saturday, not showcasing very much of that. So do you explain all of this away via the rain and the bad weather that was there? Or does this open up the door for Hugh Freeze to go into that transfer portal, as he said he might, and start looking for a quarterback? We'll find out ourselves here over the course of the next few weeks. Vanderbilt also had its spring game on Saturday there as well. I didn't see very much of this necessarily, but keep in mind, this was a Vanderbilt team that won a couple of SEC games a year ago, including against those lousy stinking Gators. So maybe that next step for the Clark Lee administration, we'll find out if they can take that in 2023. They did have their spring game there on Saturday there as well. By the way, speaking of quarterbacks, I saw an interesting quote from one of the NFL Network draft scout type guys. We talked about Hendon Hooker on Friday's show and the supposed war of words that some Tennessee fans are hoping for when it comes to Josh Heupel and Kirby Smart. As we said on Friday's show, Josh Heupel does not play at Kirby Smart's level. Tennessee does not play at Georgia's level, and right now there is no feud between Tennessee and Georgia. Tennessee has to get way better to ever hope to be in some sort of feud situation with Georgia. There may be a certain degree of rivalry between Georgia and Tennessee. That's based on tradition. The current state of affairs, though, is that Tennessee is aspiring to get to Georgia's level, and for now, Georgia is in kind of a class by itself. Tennessee has restored its rivalry with Alabama. It beat them, but hasn't come close to beating Georgia in quite some time, including during the first couple of years here for Josh Heupel. We'll see if that changes in 2023, but as it stands right now, there is no back and forth between Heupel and Kirby Smart. We'll have more on that for our Golden Shoe, by the way, coming up in just a moment. But one of the things I did say on Friday's show is, and we try to be fair and balanced when we can, is that for Josh Heupel, who we played some audio for in the show, about saying that nobody puts more on quarterbacks that we do. Basically, that's a way of saying, hey, we're developing these quarterbacks, our guys, and getting them ready to go on to the NFL. And obviously, Hendon Hooker's the guy that's been in that spot the last couple of years. And what I said on Friday was, hey, if Josh Heupel wants, the entire program that he's essentially built around quarterback play, a little bit of a gimmick offense, I think, gimmick offense designed to make quarterbacks look good. If you want credit for what you're doing, then you need to put Hendon Hooker in the first round of the NFL draft. And we said on Friday's show, there's a chance that maybe he does that. And if he does, that'll be a little bit of a trophy on the wall for Heupel to say, hey, we may not play much defense. We may have only gone 10-2, but at least we got our quarterback into the first round of the NFL draft. We're making ourselves a destination for quarterback. What happens with Hooker during the draft is going to be fascinating. And we said, Mike Tannenbaum, for instance, from ESPN, was on TV saying that that's a guy he'd take in the top 5 of the draft. We also said that Tannenbaum was a guy that's on TV because he got fired from the New York Jets, that his personnel decisions have been laughably atrocious. That's why he's eligible to work as a television analyst. I'm not quite so sure that Tannenbaum stands as much of a defense or an endorser in this case for Hendon Hooker. But it's not just Tannenbaum saying that. You've got a guy named something, is it James Palmer from the NFL Network, quoted by Bleacher Report, saying that you want to hear what teams think of Hendon Hooker, he says. He asks, there are plenty of teams that have him above the bottom 2. That means ahead of Richardson and Will Levis, guys who were thought to be first-round level quarterbacks. He says there are plenty of teams that have Hendon Hooker as the 3rd quarterback behind just Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud. Well, if that's the case, that'd be quite a endorsement for Hendon Hooker, and certainly by proxy, quite an endorsement for Josh Heupel there as well. But if it ends up not being true, and something tells me this is probably a little bit of an exaggeration, if Hooker falls out of the first round, then the idea that Tennessee, which has built its entire program around developing quarterbacks and getting good stats for them at the expense of everything else, including defense, well, that would obviously be a pretty disappointing Thursday night in a couple of weeks. And I think it's still too early to tell what's going to happen. Could Hooker be a first-round pick? There's a very good chance he could be. Could he get excluded as guys like Levis and Richardson and certainly Stroud and Young go ahead of him? That's also a possibility there as well. This, to me, makes the NFL draft pretty entertaining because Tennessee needs this to happen. They may get it, but if they don't, people are going to be asking some questions about exactly what the Tennessee offense produces when it comes to signal callers there. Now, obviously, there's an injury with Hooker. That's not the kind of thing you can't overcome. The knee is going to heal. He's going to be an NFL quarterback after that knee injury heals, so that alone shouldn't exclude him from the first round. By the way, one more point here about quarterbacks. I also saw where Prentice Air Nolan, a terrific quarterback from the Atlanta area, Langston Hughes. We talked about this the other day. It officially did happen. He has now announced his commitment to the Ohio State Buckeyes. Interesting that Nolan kind of becomes the replacement for Dylan Raiola, the former Ohio State committed quarterback who opened himself in the open market and has been closely linked to Georgia ever since then, along with a couple of other teams, but it seems like Georgia's the one with momentum right now. Nolan, on the other hand, despite being in the Atlanta area, was never really on Georgia's radar seemingly at all. So another example of in-state quarterbacks kind of being on their way other places. In the case of Nolan, a guy who put up huge numbers here in his junior season, kind of looking at out-of-state programs for the most part. Took a visit to Clemson, been closely linked to Ohio State. Pretty big prospect. I will say, if you watched Hughes play this year, one of the things that I think you'll acknowledge is it's a little bit difficult to evaluate exactly how good of a prospect Nolan is because Hughes was so much better than everybody in 6A. They're just dominating everybody all the time. And so the game comes pretty easy for Hughes. That's not Nolan's fault. He helped contribute to that. But in terms of evaluating him in comparison to other quarterbacks, the likes of which Ohio State typically recruits, I would say the evaluation in game for Nolan's a little trickier just simply because Hughes is just so much better than everybody that plays. If you want to compare Air to, which is his nickname, Air Nolan, compare him to another, former Atlanta area quarterback that also ended up at Ohio State, Justin Fields. For me, Fields would be a better prospect and probably a much better prospect than Aaron Nolan. But I do think Prentice Nolan's a good quarterback. I do. And I'm glad to see him getting a big-time offer here. I think he's one of the fun players to watch in our state right now, getting ready to go into his senior season. Clearly, he gets one of the biggest commitment opportunities that you can get right now in college football at Ohio State. So interesting here that a lot of stuff has happened around the quarterback position. Georgia, other than the commitment of Ryan Puglisi out of the state of Connecticut, has been kind of content to watch all this play out. Merklinger go to Tennessee, Nolan go to Ohio State. Georgia right now content to let it play out and watch and wait with Dylan Raiola. Early June official visit for him. Commitment decision coming up shortly after that. Seems like right now the internet chatter connects Georgia and Raiola pretty closely. Georgia all in on Dylan, the 5-star, and maybe Georgia's going to win out with him eventually as all this plays out around them. Very, very interesting stuff. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, speaking of our content from Friday's show, we kind of highlighted the supposed war of words between Josh Heupel and Kirby Smart. Tennessee fans wishing for a feud between these two coaches, despite the fact that Heupel as a coach does not play Kirby Smart's level. We got a great golden shoe style submission from someone on that very point. Our buddy Mad Dog weighing in on this, using a popular meme from the show Mad Men. You'll remember this with Don Draper, where the character, supposedly Josh Heupel, says, "I feel bad for you." And the character of Kirby Smart, kind of the Don Draper role here, says, "I don't think about you at all," which is about the way I think we would expect it to play out between Kirby and Josh Heupel right now. Very funny stuff from Mad Dog, who says, Tennessee fans are trying to start a feud. That clearly doesn't exist. Mad Dog, you are so right about that. We'll give you a golden shoe for that. And by the way, our Gator Hater Countdown, speaking of another lousy rival that's got nothing going for them, the lousy stinking Gators, 201 days from right now, Georgia beats them again. We'll see tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella, window and door of Georgia. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right, I'm going to start on YouTube first today. We're not going to go crazy long because we have a lot going on today. So we'll do all of that. But take time to let you kind of drive the bus here for a few minutes with your comments here. And we're happy to have you with us as we do. DMart42 says Hooker is still coming off an ACL, so first round should be pretty much out of the first 2 or 3. He says, but he'll be older than Stetson by the time he's medically cleared to take his first snap. Yeah, I mean, the age is a little bit of a factor for Hooker there as well. Jonathan Aaron says, if you had to choose, which one it would be, 6 Bowers on your team or 6 Darnell Washingtons on your team? That's a tough choice because obviously Darnell brings a lot to the table himself. Here's the one thing I'll say is that, I think there's a certain level of being enamored that people have had with Darnell Washington that I think that Brock Bowers obviously deserved to have more of. And you can clearly like the fact that Darnell is so excessively athletic for his size. It makes him, in a lot of ways, a truly unique specimen, of course. But in the case of Brock Bowers, I think he is his own version of that there as well. Brock Bowers is a world-class speedster for his position. World-class. And you notice that. In terms of, you sort of think about a lot of these Georgia tight ends, kind of their own, sort of superhero sort of persona. Obviously, Darnell showcases that by his size. In the case of Bowers, you may not see any of that until he runs. And then when he does run, it's unmistakable. He runs past people. So the answer to the question is I might take the 6 Brock Bowers. I might take the multiple versions of that just simply because you're getting a level of athleticism there that I still don't think he gets enough credit for. Stephen Cumby says, my mother graduated high school with Kirby and Bainbridge, and one of the senior gifts was a coffee mug with all the senior names on it. It's got Kirby's name on it. Definitely one of a kind. Stephen, that's actually really interesting. That, I would say, is a true collector's item. I think that's really cool. That's a pretty fun thing to have right there, Stephen. I'm glad you told us about that. That's awesome. Scott Harris says he warmed up the Independence of the Seas for DawgNation last week. It's dog ready. Scott, I'm glad to know that. Hope you had a great time on board Independence of the Seas. Wish you could be with us for the DawgNation cruise, but nonetheless, glad you got a chance to take your own cruise right there on Independence of the Seas. Scott, that's awesome to hear. Joshua Langford says, who's going to show up on Saturday as the best linebacker for UGA? Not quite so sure who the best is going to be, but I did think that Kirby Smart had some interesting things to say on Saturday about Xavier Soria, a guy we haven't seemingly heard as much about. And so it sounds like Xavier's in there fighting for some playing time, and that's ultimately what it's going to come down to. Healthy linebackers, kind of getting back on the field. When I say healthy linebackers, I'm also kind of counting outside guys in that too, like Marvin Jones. Seeing what that group grows in for the fall, because the interior space between the expected starters, Small Mondon and Javon Dumas Johnson, along with some of the newcomers, that trio of freshmen trying to fight for playing time, and some of the experienced guys who've been there, that may be the most competitive spot on the field. It might be indeed. Speaking of Sorey, Paul Moon said, I'm glad we've retained him thus far. Yeah, obviously there is a spring portal that opens up here after G-Day, but you'd like to see a guy like that stay with the program, and hopefully he will. Let's see what else. Kenneth Holt says Darnell was just an athletic freak of nature for his size. It's just like Jordan Davis was an athletic freak of nature for his size. Yeah, I would say it's what's turned out to be a pretty good recruiting tool for Georgia, recruiting philosophy for Georgia, is to find the kind of biggest guy for a position who's also outsized athletically for that spot. That's worked out really well for Georgia. Jordan Davis is kind of like the incredible athlete for a very big nose man. Darnell Washington, incredible athlete for a very big tight end. You know, bigger athletes, I think, are just a safer bet in general, especially in football. Bigger athletes are just a safe bet. And bigger athletes who also bring extra plus athleticism, I think at that point in time you're talking about really kind of an unbeatable combination. And it seems like Georgia has really done well with finding players of that nature. DMAR42, did we retain Savon Clark, the walk-on running back? Yeah, I believe Clark has been there. I believe he's been getting more touches and carries thus far this spring because of obviously the injuries they've had. Lesko Brandon says, is there anything on paper other than home field advantage that would suggest Bama should be better in the games they lost last year? He says, no Bryce, no Will, 2 brand new coordinators. Yeah, Lesko, I think that's a fair question. And what it leads me to is I think the fan base that has the right to be the spiciest this offseason is probably LSU fans. And it seems like we haven't heard from a ton of them for whatever reason. I don't really know why that is. I think there's a certain peculiarity to LSU fans, to be completely honest with you. We don't hear from tons of them necessarily. They do exist. They just don't seem to exist in large numbers online compared to their, it's clearly a very big fan base, but sometimes LSU fans are a little hard to find online sometimes. Not quite sure where they congregate. But the point is that if I'm an LSU fan, I'm pretty angry right now because, Alabama's being treated as clearly better than me, despite the fact that I beat them last year. And really, to a certain extent, Tennessee fans have a right to be the same thing. Now, I would say that this upcoming year, LSU brings back more than Tennessee did from this past season. But I'll tell you the thing that kind of stuck out to me on this, and this is a silly thing, it doesn't matter, but this kind of speaks to the point that Lesko is making. So the other day, ESPN online, ESPN.com, did one of those contrived, made-for-debate type things. When the NCAA basketball tournament began, they did what a lot of people do every year. What if we had a 68-team tournament for football? Kind of, let's make this up and let's just sort of play it out and kind of pretend, and we'll do it as if it was real. And all of it is just sort of designed to generate conversation. And I typically don't care about hypothetical stuff like that. That's just not that interesting to me. But for some reason, I sort of stumbled into the story, and I noticed that of their 4 number 1 seeds, they had Georgia, they had Michigan, they had Ohio State, and their 4th number 1 seed was Alabama. And this, to me, sort of speaks to the implicit bias that seems to exist with the sports media, where somehow Alabama more deserving of that number 1 seed as opposed to a team in Tennessee who had beaten Alabama and had the same regular season record Alabama did, or a team in LSU that had also beaten Alabama and had the same regular season record that Alabama did. So this speaks directly to what Lesko was saying a moment ago. There is an element in which the national media sort of treats Alabama as if it's still Alabama, and yet we're coming off a stretch where Alabama having arguably the best offensive player in the country in Bryce Young, arguably the best defensive player in the country, Will Anderson, never won a national championship with those guys. Certainly not with Bryce Young as the starting quarterback, at least. And I think that's pretty telling. That's pretty telling. Now, hey, maybe the media ends up being right about this. Maybe their hesitation to demote Alabama ends up being proven right because Alabama, maybe they rise back to the occasion here this year. It's certainly a possibility. It's Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide. They've been a fixture in this discussion now for a while. But to Lesko's point, if I'm an LSU fan, I feel very overlooked this offseason. I'm pretty spicy about that. And maybe if I'm a Tennessee fan, I kind of feel the same way. But certainly in the case of LSU, they got to the SEC championship in Brian Kelly's first year, and I think on paper they set up to be better than Alabama is right now. Ridgefly says, if this is an interesting question. He says, if Kirby Smart were to three-peat, don't you think he is the GOAT? I mean, it's the same argument with MJ. Well, the difference in MJ is MJ had 2 three-peats. So if MJ's only got the 1 three-peat, is he unquestionably the greatest of all time? I would say he's probably not. In other words, if he never came back after the baseball era, which some people, have had some conspiracy theories about, if Jordan never came back after that and added his second three-peat, I don't know that Jordan is even looked at as clearly the best of his era. Magic Johnson may have gotten some of that. And certainly by now, LeBron James would have overtaken Michael Jordan in most people's mind. So it took 2 three-peats for Jordan to establish himself as the GOAT. And in the case of Kirby, it'd probably take more than just a three-peat to establish him as the greatest coach of all time. Now, he'd be unquestionably the greatest coach of the moment, no doubt about that. And I think that, if Georgia were to go 15-0, win the national championship again, I believe you'd have to say it was the greatest run that any team has ever had. In the modern era, no one's been better than that. Now, does that make Kirby the best coach of all time? I would still say he would have a ways to go to kind of catch the overall career of Nick Saban, because keep in mind, Saban had a national championship at LSU before he came to Alabama. So there'd still be some space between Kirby and Nick in terms of the greatest coach of all time. But Kirby would have something going for him that Nick Saban never had. Nick Saban would have never in his entire career had a run of success like Kirby would have if Georgia were to go 15-0 again. But you're obviously putting the cart before the horse, because that hasn't happened yet. But if it were to happen, that's the greatest short-term run that any coach has ever been on in anything approximating the modern era. Fred Gunn says Kirby would be definitely tops all time at UGA with a three-peat. I couldn't say he was the greatest coach ever. I wouldn't be able to do that. I think he'd be on his way to one day being considered that. But to me, it's one thing to say that Georgia has a run of greatness that is unmatched by anybody else. But, I think that even in private conversation, Kirby himself would acknowledge that there would still be more to be done to be considered the greatest coach of all time. I think right now Kirby's already probably established himself as currently the best coach in college football. But you got to have some respect for the longevity here. Saban wins a championship in 2003, then again in 2009, then again in 11 and 12, then again in 15, then again in 17, then again in 20. Even though the 2020 probably comes with an asterisk because of the pandemic. You're talking about national championships in a span from 2003 all the way to 2020. That's a pretty good run of greatness right there. Paul Moon says, I'm less worried about replacing Stet than I normally would be replacing a multi-year starter because of how complementary our offense is. It isn't totally reliant on quarterback play. Paul, for the most part, I agree with you. I don't think that Georgia is as quarterback dependent as some programs are. And I think in a situation like this is where that benefits Georgia, in the fact that you're not sweating bullets about, how do you replace the quarterback that the entire offense is built around. I don't think at Georgia you have to worry about that too much. But other side of that coin, there is still, I think, this skepticism about what Stetson brought to the table. I'm not saying you have that. I'm saying just generally speaking, there's still this thought of, anybody could have done what Stetson Bennett did at Georgia. And I do think that undersells what Stetson Bennett did do at Georgia. So I actually think the challenge of replacing Bennett has actually probably been understated. I think it's probably a little bit more difficult to do than has been given credit for. Bennett's overall numbers of the last 2 years, it's an old conversation, it's a tired conversation, but they were better than he was given credit for. His performance in big games, better than he was given credit for. This is one of those things where it'd be hard to ask this question to Kirby in a way that he would give you a good answer, because it'd be very easy to just sort of deny the premise of the question. But I would love to hear from Kirby Smart about, whether he thought that Bennett was truly underrated, and whether he thinks that people underestimate the challenge of replacing Stetson for the upcoming year. You'd have to phrase that question just right to get Kirby Smart to really give you a good answer, because it'd be too easy to take an off ramp if you phrase it the wrong way. But that's one of those things I'd love to hear Kirby talk about, because I have a sneaking suspicion. I mean, I'm a contrarian by nature. When everybody's going this way, my brain has a tendency to want to go the other way. And so, as I've said now many times, I think people overstated what Georgia had to replace off the 2021 roster, because the national champion typically makes the playoff again the next year. But in 2023, I think that people might actually be understating a little bit the specific challenges of replacing what Georgia lost from last year's team, and Bennett's obviously a part of that. Denise White-Loper says, I'm a staunch believer that it is an honor to play for Georgia, and if you play for Georgia, you're playing for the G, and that should be your incentive and drive. All the accolades will definitely follow. And Denise, I think that's very well said. Very well said. Joel Moody says, if you go for 3 and 23, let me read this from Joel. So if you go for 3 and 23, we can start the GOAT conversation more realistically as we can take over the sport. Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing is if Georgia were to win, I realize if is doing a lot of work in that sense, but if Georgia were to win again, then what you're talking about is somebody having a stranglehold over college football in a way that I don't think we've ever seen before, including, Nick Saban. Even as successful as he's been, Nick Saban just didn't have 3 straight national championships. And the year in which they had a chance to win their third and didn't, that ended up being a really bad year for Nick Saban. That was Gus Malzahn out coaching him in the Iron Bowl. And that was Nick Saban. A lot of folks trying to say, the game sort of passed him by and things like that. It was the precursor to hiring Lane Kiffin. So that's either a harbinger of doom for Georgia, of the same thing's going to befall Georgia in unexpected fashion, or it's an example of Kirby being able to figure out something that Nick, when he had the opportunity to, was not able to do. Let's see what else. William Camacho says he's excited for G-Day. William, me as well. I am excited for it there as well. Alan Verbanchik saying that Auburn's a dumpster fire. Indeed, that is the case. Seems that way anyway. We'll see how busy Hugh gets to be in the transfer portal to try to change that. Let's see what else. William also saying, hope we had a happy Easter. We did. We had a very happy Easter, William, and I hope you did too. Zach Adams says, how's the quarterback battle looking thus far? Is Carson Beck still the front runner? Well, we'll get a chance to see that with our own eyes on Saturday. I guess the sense that I get is that Beck may be ahead, and maybe he's using his seniority, his time in the program, to kind of give him an advantage here. But it certainly seems like, based on what Smart is saying, if we take Smart at his word and take him seriously, it sounds like Carson hasn't pulled, dramatically ahead as of yet, that he may be slightly ahead, but he hasn't distanced himself in that competition. Now, maybe we see some distance between the two with the way they play on Saturday, but that to me is one of the things that makes G-Day really interesting, to see if the guy Carson Beck, who I think a lot of folks kind of viewed as the prohibitive favorite here, to see if he plays like a guy who's way more ready to be starting quarterback than Brock Vandagriff is. If it seems close between the two on Saturday, then I take a lot more seriously the notion that Vandagriff could eventually win the job, because you get closer to real football. I think you bring in Vandagriff's skill set into the conversation more, his ability to run around and keep plays alive, and in some cases actually run for positive yardage. So if it's close on Saturday, then I'm going to take it pretty seriously that Vandagriff has a chance to win this job. And if it appears that Carson Beck plays way better than Vandagriff, then maybe some of that kind of quiets down, fairly or not. Let's see what else. Kaylee Manziel stopping by to say, what in the world is a carnival barker? I said I was a carnival barker earlier. So a carnival barker is sort of like a ringmaster, something like that. It's the person that sort of stands outside, P.T. Barnum style, and like, hey, everybody come in here and see the big show. That's kind of what my nature is. I'm a little bit of a hype man by nature. She also asked a good question about how would the public have reacted if Phil Mickelson had won the Masters yesterday. So I think it's one of those things in which the golf world seems to be harder on Phil than the average golf fan seems to be, because the understanding I have from people who are in Augusta is that Brooks Koepka did not have a lot of fans in Augusta this weekend. That's a live guy. But Phil Mickelson kind of did have some support. And I think that just sort of speaks to, look, when it's all said and done, the name of the game in sports, if you can be, is try to be interesting. That if you want the endorsement dollars and if you want, to build a big following, you have to be interesting. And Phil is just, even at the age of 52, 53, whatever he is still just far more interesting than the average golfer is. So even if you don't like the way in which Phil kind of orchestrated some of the live stuff and the kind of, in some cases, hypocritical type things he said about all of this, it's hard not to root for a show like that yesterday. Phil, just kind of the ultimate showman.
I saw something on social media yesterday that said if Phil were to win the Masters at the Champions Dinner the following year, everybody get a 12-pack of Marlboros.
There you go. Listen, and this is one of those things. Kaylee's, very young. She's in her 20s. She doesn't understand. Like, I'm getting close enough now that 50's not too far off in the distance. For me, it's a few years away, thankfully. But listen, I can envision myself as a 50-year-old now. So when you see a guy like Phil, who's probably a little too skinny these days, but when you see a guy like Phil living his best life, 50 whatever, at least somewhat his best life. I know he's had some hard times last year or so. But when you see him living some version of his best life, that's pretty inspiring. That's pretty inspiring for me. In fact, I'm kind of in all black. You can't see I've got black pants on. I'm kind of in all black today in honor of Phil Mickelson. So let's see what else. Phil's one of my favorite professional athletes, always has been. I'm like everybody else. I don't love a lot of the live stuff. I think Phil has been kind of unfairly portrayed through a lot of this. I don't think he's been the best spokesman on his behalf, but Phil is one of my favorite athletes of all time. Levante Peterson, going back to the comparison earlier between Brock and Darnell, he says, you can't compare Washington and Brock. It's like comparing your children. You loved them both, and Levante's very right about that. I guess Zach Adams says his a little brother died in a car accident about 6 weeks ago. Zach, I'm just kind of seeing this in the comment section here. I'm very sorry about that. A lot of folks I know weighing out to you. He says, my little brother died in a car accident about 6 weeks ago. I haven't kept up with anything since then, so I'm behind on everything right now. He says, I need a speedy recap. Well, hopefully you're getting that from our audience. And, Zach, we're glad to have you back in here. And I know how traumatic that must be for you and your family. I'm so sorry, so sorry. So please pass along to all your loved ones just how sorry we are. And we love having you a part of our community here and talking Georgia football with us. Obviously, you've been taking care of some very important things, so we understand that you haven't been able to be here. But I'm glad to have you back now, and hopefully you're enjoying a little conversation back and forth with other Georgia fans there in the Facebook audience. Just very sorry for your loss. Very, very sorry for your loss. It's been a tough time for a lot of people here, it seems like. And when you have loss, you notice other people's loss, I think, more it's just more noticeable. So, Zach, we're so sorry, but we're happy to have you with us here today. Let me pop over to DawgNation.com for a moment. We'll get ready to start winding things down after that. Let's see what else. It's the Johnny Surf Dog Show over here at DawgNation.com. Johnny asked about Connor and Mike and Jeff going on a cruise. Jeff actually goes on a decent number of cruises, and Mike's going to be on the DawgNation cruise with us. I don't think Connor's doing the DawgNation cruise. It's a little bit like, like the State of the Union. Like somebody has from the constitutional line of succession has to sort of stay out of the room just in case something happens. That's sort of our version of this with Connor. Connor's got to stay back and sort of man the DawgNation, operations just in case something happens while we're overseas. So Connor's staying back, but Mike and Jeff are going to be on the DawgNation cruise with us. And Mike is quite a character on these cruises, too. So I know a lot of folks are looking forward to that. Randy Hall says, my perk is a quarterly cruise. And by the way, listen, I am thankful enough to be a part of the DawgNation cruise coming up for work. But I will tell you, the one we took in February, the one we're taking in June, those are not comps. That's coming out of my own pocket. Not to get too much into my own business here, but I am a paying customer on that, like anybody else is. That's how much I believe and love the Royal Caribbean Cruises. Paying out of my own pocket, which I don't do lightly for anything. Let's see what else is going on. DT says, going back to the idea of me being a contrarian, he says, BA likes Phil because when everybody else pulls for the righties, BA pulls for the lefty. The other thing is I'm a left-hander by nature. Now, I write right-handed because when I was a kid in school, schools were weird. But I'm a left-hander by nature. So, Phil's not quite so pudgy anymore, but he used to be kind of a pudgy left-hander, me a little bit of a pudgy left-hander. Us pudgy left-handers sort of stick together. So that's another reason why I've been very pro-Phil over the years, is because I am also a left-handed golfer. Although Phil, I guess, is a natural right-hander, just happens to golf left-handed. I am a true natural lefty who has been taught to do some things right-handed. DMart42 also left-handed there as well. I always like David Green, the former Georgia quarterback, because he was left-handed too. Paul Moon says, I'm going to lose if BA says one of those acronyms. I'm not even quite so sure what acronym that is. Let's see what else. UGA Boy for Life Brunetti says, I think if we win a championship 2023 with the recruitment we have coming in 2024. So, okay, that's a different argument. So if we're just having a hypothetical discussion, UGA Boy for Life Brunetti says, what if Georgia wins 4 straight national championships? Would that make Kirby Smart the greatest coach of all time? It becomes a very interesting conversation at that point. That would be but that's 30 more games from now. But that would be a very interesting conversation at that point. Let's see what else. Let's see what else. Little JT Daniels revisiting the talk in here. I'm trying to find a couple more comments to get to before we leave. Cody says, can you weigh on the quarterback stats in the last scrimmage? Did Carson really throw 3 picks? That is what Mike Griffith reported at DawgNation.com. Mike reported that with the 3 interceptions, so you can read that story from himself there. I don't have personal confirmation of that. That's not really the business I'm in necessarily. I did say that I don't make too big of a deal about that. What I want are quarterbacks who can make some big throws. Now, as Kirby pointed out on Saturday, hey, living to, on third down, not trying to make too much happen and giving yourself a chance at fourth down is an important thing for quarterbacks, and I think that's obviously true. But avoiding interceptions alone, for me, is not enough to make you the starting quarterback. You've also got to make some big plays there as well. The quarterbacks who probably at Georgia thrown the fewest interceptions in the season may also not have been making nearly as many big throws either. That usually interceptions kind of go up the more big throws that you're making. That's why touchdown interception ratio matters. It's one thing to say I only threw 1 pick all year long, but if you only threw 4 touchdowns, I'm not quite so sure that's so great. So what I'm going to judge from guys like Beck on Saturday, Vandegrift, Gunner as well, is not just did they avoid interceptions, but did you make something happen? Did you go out there and make some big throws? I think that's important. Kenneth Holt says, did those interceptions for Carson come against the first-team defense? They could very well have. I'm assuming they probably did. But I know for the purpose of evaluation, you're also seeing Brock, the first-team guys right now, too. In other words, you're not evaluating quarterback by Beck playing solely against the starters with Vandegrift playing solely against the second team. You're not doing that. You're giving both these guys a chance to be with the starting offense, and it'll be interesting to see kind of how that's approximated on G-Day as well. Lesko says, Guatemala Mike's asking an important question. Oh, will I bring Ella on for the G-Day forecast? I'll find out if Ella can come on. Yeah, we'll find out. I haven't talked to her in a little while, so I'll reach out. We'll see if we can get Ella for a little spring game forecast for this weekend. I'll try to do that. All right, let's see what else. Final comments. Back on Facebook here for a moment. Joel Moody also says he pulls for lefty. Bubba Watson, too. Yeah, that's another left-hander they like to pull for. And another Liv guy, too, by the way. By the way, Barry Watkins pointed out, Russell Henley made a nice run. Late. Played very well on Sunday. Sunday was you get these great days on Sunday where, you've obviously got action with the leader trying to win. Brooks kind of imploding. But Spieth makes a charge. Henley makes a charge. Obviously, Phil made one of the charges for the. You got to keep in mind that Phil had a bad stretch over the final 4 or 5 holes on Saturday, where he was well over par on that final stretch on Saturday. Other than that, he probably wins the dadgum thing. So he makes a huge charge on Sunday. Who else? You had a nice level of action, even kind of down the board a little bit on Saturday. All right, let's see what else. Barry Watkins also happy to have Henley represent the Columbus area. My understanding he still lives over there too. Miriam Corbin asked about the bookstore. Yes, we will be at the bookstore after the game on Saturday. We're excited about that. Looking forward to that. Barry Watkins disparaging me with Barry spreading misinformation in here. Zach says, thank you. And the rest of Dog Nation means more than you know. And Zach, we mean it sincerely. We really do. I mean, the pain of loss is very, very difficult, but hopefully you do find comfort in friends right now, including your friends here in Dog Nation there as well, Zach. And I mean that as genuinely as I'm capable of. All right, final comments. Let's see what else. Jonathan Moore hoping to see Brock Vandagriff show out on G-Day. Yeah, I mean, to me, Brock is the guy that I find to be really interesting here because I just feel like, you know, when you're the number 3 quarterback, this is true, I think, for Carson in 2021. I think it was true for Brock last year. There's an extent, you've heard me say this before, where you kind of become a little bit out of sight, out of mind. So I would say that Brock is the guy that I'm most interested in on Saturday, and that's not disrespectful towards Carson. I don't have a preferred outcome in this quarterback competition. I'd be thrilled for either guy. But I feel like right now I know a little bit more about Carson than I do Brock, and so I'm kind of curious to see how well Brock does because to me, the quality of the quarterback competition is determined by Brock Vandagriff. That if Vandagriff, by being a little bit older, if he's thought to be a little bit ahead of Gunner right now, that means the responsibility for making a great competition is on Brock. Because if Carson, the more experienced guy, the eventual winner in the eyes of some, you don't want that to happen by default. You want him to overtake a capable player. So to me, this may even be a topic for the show, but Vandagriff is the single most interesting player on G-Day. The single most interesting. Because if he's good and Carson still wins the quarterback competition, well, that to me only means that Carson's that much better for having overtaken Brock during spring practice. So the single most interesting player on G-Day is probably Brock Vandagriff. With that said, we're going to wrap it up for today. Thanks for being here. Y'all check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online, AJC.com. Deep coverage from Augusta National, of course. Also, a little bit of a messy weekend for the Braves. Nice night on Thursday. I was there for that. And then you kind of get going with some Easter stuff on the weekend. You know, have church on Friday, again on Sunday. And, by the time I turned on the Braves game last night after having been at my mom's house, they were down 10-2. I was like, whoa, what a weekend. Ugh. So how do you go and get better from here? Well, you read more about that online, AJC.com as well. Plenty of other good stuff there, too. So check all of that out online. And then we will see you all back here tomorrow, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, 10 a.m. after that across all platforms. And then our R.S. Andrews cool down when that's all said and done. And speaking of R.S. Andrews, find them online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. After a little brief cold weather spat, what do you call that, a blackberry winter, is that what that's called? After a little bit of a cold weather spat over the course of the last couple of days, spring is sort of back now, which reminds you air conditioning units are going to be turned on. So make sure yours is tuned up and back to its factory fresh specs, ready to go for the upcoming spring and summer. Find them online at rsandrews.com for a lot more on that. Okay, I'll take a little bit of a hiatus here, and then see you back here tomorrow morning, 9:45, 1st and 15, 10 a.m. after that for DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. Talk to you then.